Welcome to the People's Revolution podcast. This is a space where we share stories from activists around the world. We hope that these stories inspire you to act locally as we share
Well, I don't have a problem with you. This generation, look around, there's nothing left to do. Liberation, take one final step and then you'll see the complication. System don't belong to you or me.
Welcome to the People's Revolution podcast. We're going to start today, as always, with a land acknowledgement. A recognition that we are on stolen land is not enough when the genocide we call history still continues today and is reinforced by the daily lives of those unaware. Residential schools only closed their last doors in 1997, but the mentality of the residential schools lives on. White people, imagine living in a place that not only normalizes genocide, but actively covers it up. We don't live here because a peaceful treaty was signed. We live here because white people before us brutally pushed their way in. This includes our current government, RCMP, and churches. And we need to acknowledge this and the harmful systems that it brought with it before we can even attempt to create reconciliation. It is a privilege to not know that you are living in such a way that makes a genocidal reality seem like regular everyday life. I would still like to recognize that the stolen land I'm speaking from is rightfully the home of the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations and was forced to be the home of Treaty 7. These nations are Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani. In these spaces, the Siksika people lived and practiced their oral traditions as far back as existence goes. Treaty 7 was signed on September 22, 1877 in a brutally unethical way. This treaty was not upheld. Treaty 7 includes the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Stoney-Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation of Region 3. So, this space known as Calgary is rightfully known as Mohkinstsis. Thank you. So today we have Paul, the singer of Permanent Revolution, an anti-fascist oi band from Brisbane, Australia, formed in 2016. He is also one of the founding members of Punks and Skins Against Bigotry, and he has a bunch of other projects too, and I'm excited to talk about them. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Julia. Thanks for your time. And I'll do an acknowledgement too, if that's okay. I'll acknowledge the traditional owners of Meanjin, which you know is Brisbane, the Jagera, the Turrbal people. Pay my respects to the elders, past, present, emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. This land was stolen, never ceded, and always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Thank you very much. You're actually the first guest to do a land acknowledgement, maybe the second, but thank you for doing that very much. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because you do a lot. You do a lot of work that I think is important. You do a lot of solidarity action, and your music really speaks to your values, and I'm very excited to talk about it.
Cool.
I'd like to start just with a little bit of your backstory. What brought you to here? What brought you here? What brought you to activism? That kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess it's quite a journey. I'm 56, so I've been around for a little bit, but you know, grew up in basically a council house in a traditional blue-collar working class family. Back in the day when, you know, in Australia at least, at least 50% of workers were in trade unions. In some sectors it was 100%. It was a closed shop. You couldn't work if you weren't. You know, Dad was in the Labor Party. He was on the local Trades and Labor Council. His mother had been a shop steward in a clothing factory for 10 years during the Depression. So, you know, that's the kind of pedigree that bred me, I guess. So grew up with a fairly rudimentary class consciousness and hatred of the rich, not in any particularly coherent, you know, ideological sense, but I guess that's what my starting point was. And, you know, as a really angry teenager, by the time I got to high school with a big chip on my shoulder, you know, like punk really spoke to me, and you know, the early Pistols, Clash, that stuff just blew my brain away, and yeah, so that's what got me into it. But you know, various iterations of jobs and that, and learning a lot about the trade union movement, working myself on building sites, builders labour and that sort of stuff, and also in more office type environments. Always makes me think of that Foreskin song, Be a Builder's Labourer or an Office Clerk, because I've done both and learnt a lot from both of them. But I guess one of the things in terms of the anti-fascist stuff was being a punk in the early 80s and seeing it as something progressive and anti-establishment and really resonating with my anger and outrage and all that. And then coming across like the Oi albums, the skinhead stuff, and really loving it. But then meeting skinheads in the early 80s that were just like dicks, like just racist and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't want anything to do with that. And I found it really, really confusing. And just seeing gigs trashed and gig hiling and all that sort of stuff and just being really disillusioned and fucking hating it. On top of working class values in politics, seeing fascism as a huge threat to the working class, because historically fascism has always been about smashing the working class and all our institutions, starting with Mussolini smashing, like 2 years of factory and land occupations in in Italy, and going on to Hitler and Franco, like outlawing, rounding up leftist trade union leaders, et cetera, and basically trying to exterminate them or sending them to labor camps. So seeing from a working class perspective what fascism was and what it stood for historically, and then seeing in a movement that I thought was progressive was really disillusioning. And since then, I've just, both in and outside the scene, it's always something that I've wanted to fight and oppose.
Yeah, and so you wrote an article on Red Flag about the differentiation that you found between skinheads and boneheads, and I thought that was really impactful and important because there is boneheads, unfortunately, that call themselves skinheads, and I can imagine it's quite disillusioning when you're first starting into the scene, and then also like for people looking into the scene.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we call them boneheads. We don't recognize them as skinheads. I guess I see skinhead, if you look at the history going back to the 60s and the Windrush generation and Jamaican immigrants bringing culture and music and all that. The early skinheads were no angels. I'm sure there was racism, sexism, homophobia, all that sort of stuff. But organized racism around things like the National Front, the British movement, wasn't part of it. And the legacy is that because they hijacked our scene, like everywhere I go, people still look at me and, assuming I'm a Nazi thug or something like that. And it's still something you have to explain. That's why, like the local crew in Brisbane, we all wear sharp patches over our hearts or somewhere visible so that we can point to and explain and so forth. When it comes down to it, I see being a skinhead as an expression of a form of cultural exchange between British working class white youth and the Windrush generation. I see bonehead as cultural appropriation. Like they weren't given that; they took it away. They used that as their uniform. I think often, like I wasn't in Britain in the 70s and early 80s. I was in Australia, but it was often like young, angry, disillusioned youth looking for answers, and they found answers in the wrong places with the wrong people. But some very, very dangerous people involved in that. Some of the violence that we've seen in the scene since the early 80s was just incredible. It's like I said in the article, it was different in different cities and different places and different times, but it's been a constant problem. I don't think, well, in my experience, I don't think it's a bigger problem as it was in the past in terms of people getting smashed up and that sort of stuff, which isn't to say that Nazis and neo-Nazism isn't a big problem, but they tend, in Australia at least, to be outside the scene. In my city at least, I doubt very much they'd come to our gigs, but I can't imagine that happening at all. But even at other gigs, we don't see them. They're there, but they're not really a problem with the scene. I can only speak for my city and to some extent my country. Like I said, it's different everywhere and there's a different history everywhere.
Yeah, like in the beginning of the article, and we'll link the article below so everyone can check it out. But yeah, at the beginning of the, so the 14 words, it's just an interesting time that we're recording because a day or two ago, someone in Calgary dropped a banner on one of our main roads that had the 14 words on it. And it was very emboldened, like it was big, it was huge, and it was just there. And it just unfortunately speaks to how big of an issue This still is, and yeah, I don't see these fuckers coming out to shows or anything, or just like I personally haven't recently, but I do know they've been to shows in the past, and they're brave enough to put a giant banner on one of our biggest roads heading into downtown. So yeah, it's great that you commented on that in the article, just to, like, some people don't know what the 14 words are, so it's, yeah, it's fucked, but it's important to talk about. When did you... Oh, sorry.
I certainly wouldn't want to give the impression that there's no longer a problem, because in terms of neo-Nazism, I think it's a much bigger problem today than even in the early 80s in Australia. Maybe not so much in England, because there was, the National Front and the British movement were quite dangerous. But in Australia, back in the early 80s, it was a much bigger problem in the scene. I don't think it's as big a problem in the scene, but outside the scene, I think neo-Nazi movements are much bigger and stronger and much more scary. It was only like a year or two ago that we had basically fascist riots in Melbourne, mobilising, anti-vaxxers, anti-lockdown people, all that sort of stuff. They were attacking trade union officers, attacking people lining up for COVID tests. I know someone that was working in an office helping homeless people. They had to close down because of threats of violence. And yeah, like they're really dangerous, and they intermittently become a lot more confident to take to the streets. So back in 2015, we'll talk about that more later, when large numbers of racists were mobilised on the streets, we counter-mobilised and we, drove them back under the rock. But they came out in force a year or two ago, and they're bigger than us in terms of the left and the opposition that's prepared to take to the streets. So I think it's a really fucking dangerous time.
Yeah, it's kind of a similar scene here, and it's pretty scary. But you and your, like, also someone in your band, I guess, work in Punks and Skins Against Bigotry, which has worked to kind of mobilize against these kind of things, or at least draw attention to it.
Yeah, it's Jimmy, who is our former bass player. He's not in the band anymore. He him and I set the band up, and the Punks and Skins, Facebook page and various things. And I guess the motivation for that was the same as the band, around 2015, going to mobilise against, I don't know if I'd call them fascists. They were far-right mobilisations, racist mobilisations that included a core of fascists and allowed fascists to coalesce. But going there in 2015 and seeing on the one side punks and people that I would recognise from gigs, and on the other side seeing boneheads, it was something that I thought, well, we need to network. So I set this group up so people could network and share information about the scene. Sometimes it's just bands and hey, this gigs on, but also about what was happening in terms of the clash and so forth, and like who's doing what, that sort of stuff. But also Jimmy, I met him because he was playing with a band called Murder Place, which is an anti-fascist hardcore band. And I went to see them a couple of times, and the thing that stood out was, apart from the he had a trade union sticker on his bass. He was bass player and singer, and he also had an anti-fascist sticker. And I thought, okay, well, this is my kind of guy. So I reached out to him, and as a result of some conversations, we decided. I said, look, I'd like to get a band going. I hadn't been in a band for a long time, been in and out of the scene with kids and all that. I'd like to get an anti-fascist oi band going. I think there's a space where it's needed, and I want to get a group going where we can all network. And he said, yeah, good idea. And that's how both was born, basically. He's no longer in the band. Our current bass player, Luke, actually, I met him going around gig leafleting anti-fascist mobilisations, and I saw this guy sitting there in a St. Pauli t-shirt, and I thought, yeah, this guy will be safe. Gave him a leaflet, chatted, and yeah, he ended up replacing Jimmy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so around 2015, it kind of sounds like both things started for you, but before that, you were already into the sharp ideology and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, when I was younger, I was a punk, and I kind of dropped out of the scene for a number of reasons, kids, all that sort of stuff. And like I said, in the early days, I met skinheads and didn't really want anything to do with them because of the racism and that sort of stuff. It wasn't until later that I came across bands like, The Oppressed and all that. And I realized, okay, you can be a skinhead and be anti-fascist. In fact, more importantly, if you're a skinhead, you have to be anti-fascist because, skinhead, know your roots or give up your boots, as they say. Like, I didn't understand the roots and where it came from. Although I did understand that, say in Australia, places like Sydney and that, there were two groups of skins from what I remember in the early 80s. So there was like the punk, the oi type skins that had started via the punk scene that really didn't know about the 60s and where skinheads came from. And then there was the, like the rude boy, rude girl and punky type skins that were into ska and all that, who did know their roots, and they didn't want anything to do with racism and all that sort of stuff. So the two groups were quite separate. So I had, I guess, some kind of idea that it wasn't really until getting into bands like The Oppressed and so forth, and similar sharp bands later that I realized, okay, well, this is what it should be all about, working class subculture, working class pride, and being working class means understanding that fascism is the enemy of the working class. It's not something that could belong in our subculture. That's why we call them boneheads. You can't be a skinhead and be a fascist. It's a complete oxymoron, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And so in your kind of, I guess, years since working with both punks and skins against bigotry, and then working within your band Permanent Revolution, you've done a lot of work, I guess, before we get into music, in like solidarity with either other actions or things happening, other bands around the world, like other countries. Like going through your stuff was incredible. Seeing everything from you helping support people in Myanmar, to Belarus, and then there is a lot of support for, there was a couple things for Indigenous action in Australia, refugee action, like the list goes on and on. But I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess with the band, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to have fun and play some half-decent punk rock and people have a good time. I think we do that. I think we should put on a decent show. But yeah, we put on a number of fundraisers and we've raised, I don't know how much money, and I don't want to just ignore ourselves and say, aren't we good? But it's something that a lot of other bands also have been really supportive of. So we've raised money for like refugee groups. The first gig we ever did actually was we organised a gig, and it was for the campaign against racism and fascism, which was a Melbourne-based group because that was kind of the epicenter of the rise of the Clash. That's where they were the most dangerous, raising money for them. And since then, there's CARP, Campaign Against Racism and Fascism. There's CARP groups in other cities, including Brisbane. So we've done what we can, and that includes, overseas solidarity wherever we can do it. So we're doing a fundraiser this weekend for, I don't know if people have heard of a band, Mr. X, and Barnsa over there. He's apparently just been arrested again, but there's people from the scene over there, and more broadly, that are facing prison terms, anti-fascists, but also for nothing more than taking part in anti-government protests. So we're trying to raise a bit of money for them to help with legal costs. So that's something we've done as well. If someone's in trouble, we try to help them out, whether it's, like my city, my country, or elsewhere in the globe. Like I see us as all being part of the same fight. So I don't want to go into all the, the Ukraine, Putin, all that sort of thing, like apart from saying fuck Putin and fuck NATO, but I don't care whether they're anti-fascists in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus. If they're anti-fascists and fighting their own government and they're against war or whatever, I'm going to support them. It doesn't matter which country they're in.
Mm-hmm. Is the person that in Mr. X in Belarus, is that person still in prison?
I saw something, he was released. He was originally sentenced to 5 years hard labour, and then he was released. I did see a meme just this week saying that he's been arrested again. He's in detention in Minsk, and I don't know any further details. That was only a few days ago. So yeah, I don't know, but it's tough over there, being anti-fascist, anti-government, whatever. And if you're against the war, I guess it's very, very difficult to be a dissident over there.
Yeah, but it is, yeah, it's really good that there's people like you doing the solidarity work to support. Definitely. And yeah, I even think it speaks to your character that like your very first show was a fundraiser. I think I have a flyer for it. Yeah.
That's the one, Riffs Against Racism. Well, it was actually a free gig because it was all ages. It's a car park of a local community radio station, and we just collected donations and did raffles and auctioned off a flag and that sort of stuff. I think we raised about $1,000. Don't quote me. It may have been less. We've done quite a few, so I can't remember how many. But we did raise money, and it's also about raising the profile and encouraging people to identify with CARF and get involved and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that was back in 2016. So
Right, that was our first gig, yeah.
yeah, and since then it seems like you do fun shows, but you do a lot of not fundraising shows, but also like solidarity work.
Yeah, we try to, yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty incredible. Like I found this other. I'll just pull it up for us. So when you did the show in support of Myanmar.
Yeah. So that was a good show. Each of the bands did a three-fingered salute in support of Myanmar and the struggles there. 2 years ago, I can't remember the timing, and then we got a group photo, I think. And what instigated that was there's someone in the scene here's got a friend in the UK, because the person here is from the UK, who had spent a lot of time in Myanmar and in the scene there, and was just trying to promote what was happening there and calling for support and solidarity. So we did this. We weren't raising money or anything, but it was just a simple gesture, but letting them know that people outside of Myanmar were thinking of them and supporting them and so forth. So, it doesn't take much to lift three fingers in the air, but hopefully it does something for letting people know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And even like a little bit closer to home, like you guys have been involved or have promoted or showed up for stopping far right protests and those kinds of things. I'd like to pull up one more picture just to ask you what was happening here. Can you tell me about, I guess, this protest or what was happening?
Yeah, that was about, okay, now that was November 2015. And that's, as I was referring to earlier, it's one of the things with the catalyst for, getting the band going and the Punks and Skins Against Bigotry and all that sort of stuff. So there had been that year a growing street movement called Reclaim Australia, which was just a collection of racist fucks, basically, including a hardcore of neo-Nazis, fascists. They weren't the majority people. Most people were, I consider, right-wing or far right or whatever, I don't know, but not convinced neo-Nazis, but just, racist fucks, nationalists and all that sort of stuff. A lot of anti-Islam sentiment, all that sort of stuff. They started off their first rally just in Brisbane, had about 800 or 1,000 people, which is a pretty big, Brisbane's a couple of million or so. That's a pretty big mobilisation. It was around the Easter weekend in 2015. They had much bigger mobilisations in Melbourne, and they were quite aggressive, a lot of confrontations, that sort of stuff. So people started getting more organised in terms of mobilising against them. And they had another one later that year. It's probably still bigger than us. You know, we were prevented from physically confronting them by a row of cops in between us that cordoned them off, but you know, we did whatever we can to drown them out, shouted abuse, all that sort of stuff. Once or twice we tried to get through the police lines, but it didn't happen. I don't think anyone in our side got arrested from memory. There wasn't any violence or anything like that. But we kind of thought, well, if we can't physically confront them, what we can do is make this such an unpleasant experience that, you know, the garden variety racists might not want to come back again because they really don't like being heckled and abused and called racist scum and the rest of it. And it worked to some extent. So I think by the next one, which is the photo there, I don't think we're outnumbered. I think it was a bit more even. Someone managed to, a local anarchist managed to get through and fuck up their sound system. So that helped as well. Again, there was a line of cops and so forth. I think one or two people might have been arrested, but we just, you know, subjected them to whatever abuse and noise we could, drowned them out with our own speeches and chants and that sort of stuff. But we did manage to prevent them. They had been planning to take to the street and march, and we prevented them from marching, which I think was a victory in itself. After that, they really kind of like didn't mobilize much after that. They did mobilize in Melbourne, where they actually marched through the streets of a suburb with a large Muslim and, you know, migrant population to cause, to quote one of their leading figures, fear and terror. And they were, you know, like physically confronted then. But then there was a bit of a hiatus for a while. But like I said, the pandemic, the anti-lockdown and all that sort of stuff it really gave them a shot in the arm a couple of years ago. So it doesn't matter when they go away, you know, they go back under their rock, but they're there waiting. Sometimes they're more dangerous when you can't see them. But, yeah.
That's true. And
like you on Invasion Day, which is, officially called Australia Day, but we call it Invasion Day, like a bunch of local fash, the National Socialist Movement or whatever the fuck they call themselves. They also hung a big banner over a bridge, which a lot of traffic could see, you know, like Australia is white or something, or denying the genocide and, you know, basically reinforcing all the terra nullius bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds like there's a lot of similarities between, unfortunately, Australia and Canada, even with like at around the same time you were speaking of, we did also have anti-Islam, anti-Muslim fascist protests here, and there was opposition to it, and then it switched to the Freedom Rally, which just speaks to the fascism of those groups, because they'll just jump from one thing to another, and it doesn't really matter as long as it's like getting people on board, or it's like the populist belief, which is the scariest thing about the freedom movement, because a lot of just right-wing people are getting on board with fascist ideology, and it's pretty terrifying.
It's an absolute breeding ground for them. And like with the anti-Muslim thing, you know, like we've got, say, a politician like Pauline Hanson, who is, you know, part of this milieu, the far right racist milieu, thoroughly anti-Islam, but, you know, they're just the latest, you know, bogey. I mean, in the 90s, when she first got a profile, it was, you know, Southeast Asian people, Vietnamese people, that sort of stuff. But after 9/11, you know, like Muslims became the number one enemy. Back in the 90s, she probably didn't even know what a fucking hijab was, you know, like, but just they're the new enemy, as well as Indigenous people. She's, you know, like thoroughly racist when it comes towards Indigenous people. But it's like throughout time, the enemy can become someone different, but basically the rhetoric doesn't really change. It just becomes someone else becomes the target.
And in 2016, I think you guys even held a show against Pauline Hanson.
That's right, we did. Yeah, Punks Against Pauline.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Yeah, she's a very high profile. She does stunts, and She wore a full burqa into Parliament once, to say, oh, make some kind of silly point. I don't know what it was, but yeah, she's a completely vile but very high-profile racist politician in Australia. She's a senator.
Yeah, from like her group is called One Nation. Is that right?
Yeah, One Nation. But there's, I think, a lot of, I don't know that much about Canada, but and the US as well. I mean, I think there's a similar history in terms of being, like colonial settler states or whatever you want to call it. But also with the, like to build capitalism in a country like Australia, racism is central to that project. You cannot do it without racism. So the whole concept of terra nullius, like when Australia was first being built as a series of colonies and into the 20th century when it federated as a country, I mean, originally it was primary industry. So it was mining, agriculture, sheep, cattle, that sort of stuff. Huge, massive cattle stations in Australia and huge mines. Now, in order to put them there, you have to dispossess the people that were already there. And to be able to do that, to be able to basically commit genocide or dispossession, you have to justify it by either saying terra nullius or that, they're not as good as white people have priority, or whatever it is. But without racism, you simply can't build capitalism in a country like Australia. From what I can gather, Canada and to a larger extent the US, it's got a similar kind of like project, and racism's absolutely built into the DNA of building capitalism in those countries.
Yeah, it is the exact same, especially with our natural resource extraction. Like extra, especially with our resource extraction, we even still to this day, like there is like sections of our RCMP that work specifically for those oil and gas companies to remove Indigenous people from their land. Even in like our most like progressive, quote unquote, like progressive government, like they are still very much a part of it and contributing to it. And even in British Columbia, the worst part of it, actually, unfortunately. But it's the same. Yeah, it is unfortunate. But I like even on your Facebook page, I'll pull it up on the screen, but you have a land acknowledgement just like right on the top of the Facebook group. And I thought
You're talking about the group or the band?
The
Facebook group.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually first saw the land acknowledgement on your band page, and then it took me to the group. Oh, yeah. But I like that you just have it there. Yeah. Do you is there land acknowledgements? Do you do them at shows as well?
Yeah. Before every show, we'll do an acknowledgement. Yeah. Always. And it's quite normal, like, on the left, whether it's a meeting or at a rally or something like that, if it's something on the progressive side, it's normally there'll be an acknowledgement of the traditional owners. Yeah. If available, a local elder, like an auntie or an uncle, will do a welcome to country, which is different to an acknowledgement. An acknowledgement is, something that a white person can do, acknowledging they're on the traditional lands of Indigenous people. A welcome to country is something that only basically an Indigenous elder of that local area can do. And it stems from the days where, because there was hundreds of different nations and languages and so forth in Australia pre-colonization. So if you were traveling and you came to where another group was, you'd basically wait there. You wouldn't cross until someone from that land, that country, said, okay, you're welcome, you can come here. So there might be, before a rally, there might be a traditional smoking ceremony, and an elder will do a welcome to country. So you're like, welcome, basically you're welcome to be here.
I've never heard of that. That's interesting.
Look it up. So we'll often have a big rallies will have like a smoking ceremony or something like that. Particularly, say, every Invasion Day, there's big marches, and they've been quite big in recent years as well. They'll usually have all the traditional Indigenous cultural welcomes and acknowledgements and smoking ceremonies and so forth. So I mean, you know, we're talking about the oldest continuous culture in the world that's survived, that's still here. It's 65,000 years old or something and counting. So, yeah. Even though I'm a white person, I'm not Indigenous. I do take a certain amount of pride knowing that I'm in a country that, you know, has a culture that survived that long and still fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed on your band's page, you were sharing the 50th year anniversary, 50 years of resisting Aboriginal tent embassy. That's been around since 1972.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, in Canberra, the capital of Australia, which most people overseas seem to have never heard of. They usually assume it's Sydney or something. But in Canberra, in 72, some Indigenous activists actually assembled what they called an embassy. So the Aboriginal tent embassy outside the original Parliament House. And, you know, it's had its trials and tribulations and been attacked and so forth over the years and shut down, but it's still there today. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually incredible that it's been around for 50 years and it's still resisting.
It's the same year, that's when the Aboriginal flag was designed as well. The black for the skin, yellow for the sun, and red for the land.
Oh, I did not know that. It's important, and honestly, there's so much more that I can get into, but I want to start asking you about your band and your lyrics and your music. So Permanent Revolution. So here I can throw a clip just so people can hear what kind of a live show with you would be about.
I once heard punk rock described as sounding like someone trying to scream over the top of a chainsaw, which, you know, probably something like that. But
you know what? That is good live punk. I'll be honest with you,
Yeah.
It is. What is your favorite song that you've either written, like your favorite song to write, or your favorite song to jam or play, and why?
Oh, God, that's a hard one. I really like playing a song called Under the Radar, which we've recorded, but we haven't released yet. We've got a couple songs to go for a new album that we hope to have out next year. We were hoping to have it out this year, but, you know, COVID, life, etc. It's kind of rock and rolly, I guess. There's another one that we haven't released called Touch One, Touch All. You know, about the trade union movement and that sort of stuff. But I don't know, it's very hard for me to single one out. There's two songs that we do at every single show. We always do a song called Gender Blind, which is you know, solidarity with the queer community. And then we always finish with a cover called United We Stand by The Oppressed. So every gig we've ever done, we've finished with that. And yeah, they're good songs to play, but picking out a favorite, I don't know. That's difficult. I don't know that I could.
I did watch your Gender Blind video on your YouTube, and I'll also link the YouTube below so everyone can check out your YouTube and your Bandcamp, all your music. And yeah, it was a great video. I also saw your picture of you in the Pride Not Prejudice shirt, and also throw that. And I thought
we put that up. I think, sorry, I spoke over the top of you then, sorry. I think we put that up during Pride Week at one stage, or I don't know what's happening over there, but in Australia, we got like marriage equality a few years ago, and the kind of like far right evangelical, you know, religious bigots have really been trying to like push back against that. At the moment, they're using transphobia as the wedge to try to, like making big clickbait headlines about trans people in sport and all that sort of stuff, which is, I don't know, I don't think it's that big an issue, but they're making it an issue to try to push back, use that kind of wedge of politics. So.
Yeah, we're actually having the same issue here right now. There is white supremacist, I want to call them white terrorist groups protesting outside of, it's so stupid. There's drag queens, it's like drag queen story time. So it's like drag queens reading books to children. And they've like made it their mission to counter protest this currently. And there has been counter protest to them, and that's really great. Especially in Edmonton, like props to Edmonton for showing up and kicking Nazi ass, but the rhetoric right now is pretty disgusting.
The exact same thing happened here. We had people turning up protesting drag time story a couple of years ago. But I think a lot of what happens here, like when Trump was elected and everything that's happened around Trump, then I think it gave a shot in the arm to a lot of stuff happening here, because it gives confidence, I think, to all the bigots when they see, like, the other thing is, Roe versus Wade being overturned. That's got the religious right, as, prick their ears up. They see that as an opportunity to push back against reproductive rights. So, and I think that's a really important one, because it's disgusting as it is that was overturned. I think it makes it clear that even things that we've won, we can lose if we don't keep fighting.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, here, I think it was on the other side of Canada, there was one of the first, so a doctor decided to say no to, I don't know if it was for an abortion or if it was for birth control, but they said no because of religious reasons. And so now we're kind of freaking out in Canada as well. But yeah, you are right. Like, it's been emboldened since Trump, and it's been getting a little worse. But so I noticed on your band page, it was, I think, 2017, the Australian government had announced against marriage equality, and you guys were, there was some kind of legislation that was being passed, and you guys were standing against it, and said that you will be voting yes, and we are urging people to do the same thing.
That was a plebiscite on marriage equality. So I remember, I think it was 2004, I can't remember the exact year, but the former Conservative John Howard, the former Conservative Prime Minister, made an amendment to the Marriage Act so that it said that marriage could only be between a man and a woman. And there was a bit of a campaign kicked off then. I remember in the early days, trying to collect petitions or that sort of thing, and not that much interest. And most people supported that at the time. Most people were against marriage equality. Campaign, including, big street mobilizations and that sort of stuff, organizations like the trade union movement supporting it, meant that swung around. So eventually the government felt pressured to do something. They put a plebiscite, and I think it was 68% yes and 32% no. So about 2/3 of people said yes to marriage equality. So that is now law. And that's what that was about. And that's something we were supporting and calling for a yes vote. And, we're happy to throw our support behind.
Yeah, I also noticed that you were posting also about Roe versus Wade and asking people to speak out and show up. And I thought that was really important.
Yeah, you reminded me of stuff that sometimes I forget about, like I said before, with a million things on the go. And yeah, that's right, we did do that.
Yeah, I did a deep dive. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, I watched your video on Facebook for Class Trader. And I also checked out I think a lyric video on Facebook or on YouTube. And I thought that song was really impactful. So I wanted to ask you about it.
That is one that we really enjoyed playing, and actually that was really inspired by that photo that you put up of November 2015 and seeing boneheads. There was a group of boneheads. They're not around anymore. They've either stopped being, like Nazis, or say they have, or they're just not around. But anyway, it's kind of about them, or about working class people, because most of the people on the other side probably were working class people, allowing bigotry and hatred to divide working class people, because we've got far more in common with each other. I've got more in common with a factory worker or an office worker in Jakarta or Montreal or Addis Ababa than I'll ever have with, like billionaires like Gina Reinhardt, who's the richest woman in Australia. I'll never know what it's like to sail a private yacht around my own island, stuffing champagne and caviar down my throat. And I don't particularly desire to, but like the whole working class movement, the whole trade union movement that I've been involved in for something like 40 years is about collective strength. It's about unity. It's about solidarity. It's about, I don't care if the person on either side of me is Muslim, Christian, white, black, gay, straight. If they're here to support the picket line, they're my comrades. The enemy's on the other side. And people that allow racism, bigotry of any sort, really, they are class traitors. They're betraying their class. And that's what that's about. And it flowed from that demonstration.
Yeah, I think that's important, and especially making art to express anger. I think it really shares that anger with a lot of other people in a way that they can hear it and process it, and maybe also do something themselves. Definitely. Another song I wanted to ask you about that really stuck out to me was Red Salute.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a picture that I'll throw up of your crew at May Day 2021, which I think kind of speaks to the song itself, because it does sound like it's for workers and May Day. Did you want to share a little bit about that process?
Yeah, sure. Well, Red Salute is a tribute to working class people the world over, their trials, their tribulations, their victories, their losses. It's about solidarity, and it's a salute to working people. It kind of flows from, there's a line in it, something like, I come from common working stock, that sort of stuff. And there's a line something like, I'm still proud that their blood flows through my veins. It's about my own working class roots and my family's involvement in the trade union movement and being part of, the historical struggle to get us to where we are. So it's recognizing that people in the past have fought and suffered, but made important wins. Everything we have today is not because it just magically manifested itself. We have had to drag the ruling class kicking and screaming for every single crumb that we've ever won from them, whether it's an 8-hour day or decent working conditions or the right to vote or equal pay for women, whatever it is, we have had to fight for it. So it's a tribute to the people that have fought for what we have today and that continue to fight.
Yeah, and again, for people listening, I'm going to put the link for the YouTube and the Bandcamp below so you can listen to, check out, watch all these cool things. Definitely. You've also done some like collaboration albums, solidarity albums, I guess, work through music. One of them being this. Oh, I hit my mic. This CD right here. Did you want to share about Oi Against Bigotry, PBS Emotions Presents?
Yeah, PSB, which is just Punks and Skins Against Bigotry. But, so I just basically got the idea, I've been trying to do fundraising through gigs and so forth, and I thought this might be another way. And I kind of seem to be fairly good at networking, so I was able to reach out to a lot of people that I've dealt with over the years. So I put together 20 songs, a couple of bands from Australia, bands from Canada, the US, and like Southeast Asia, close to where I am, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Europe. I think it's a really good compilation. On top of trying to make some money, there's some really good bands on that. So I'm quite proud of the work we did on that. Yeah, I think Class Trader's on that one, isn't it? I think it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, Class Trader is your Yeah, your
Mm,
song on here.
yeah.
Yeah, you have like, yeah, the Prowlers, the Oppressed, Oi Polloi, Snob City Boys. It's amazing. Um, yeah,
Yeah, there's good
Backbreaker.
stuff
We love
on.
Backbreaker.
Yeah, love Backbreaker. We're looking at doing some dates with them in Europe next year. Been working with Terry on that, so that's something we're really excited and looking forward to. No, nothing's been officially announced yet, but been working on putting together a Sharp Fest in Manchester in July next year with about 7 or 8 bands.
Cool.
So that's something to look forward to. And while we're there, we're looking at playing a couple of other dates as well. But yeah, Terry's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah.
a good band, good people. And
Yeah.
it's good people like the shows that we put on. I don't really give a flying fuck if I hate the band. If they're good people, like I'll take good people over a good band any day if the good band are fuckwits. Like, if you're good people with our values, then we'll play with you. I don't really care.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll put this picture up. But you did a Backbreaker. You're part of a Backbreaker music video, and then you took a group picture
That's
after.
right, yeah.
So I'll just put it up. But then I'll actually put a video or the link for the video in the comment section as well, so everyone can check it out. But it was a really fun video.
That's the
So
anti-fascist boy one, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that was
Uh,
good.
yeah, no, that was good fun. We were a little um inebriated by the end of that night, but yeah, no, it was good fun. That was in my lounge room or a former house, yeah, with just some of the local crew. We've got
Nice.
a good local crew, like a lot of good sharp skinheads in Brisbane. Yeah.
Awesome. Very awesome. It's always, yeah, it's good. You need like people around you that also just like hate fascism with a burning passion as much as you do, or you feel like you're gonna go crazy.
Yeah. That's why, like um the current lineup of the band, well, the former lineups, other people been good, but like I said, we started off with Jimmy and it's Luke now, and then we had a couple of drummers, and we did have one drummer for a couple of years that ended up quitting, and we were looking around for a drummer, and DJ, our current drummer, had played in a band with Luke in the past, and really good drummer, and just on the same page, like really good guy, anti-fascist, knows what he's talking about, that sort of stuff. So I think that's the strength of the band. Obviously we don't agree on everything. We have our, where everyone has their own, little disagreements and so forth politically. I guess that's normal and to be welcomed. But basically on the same page as far as broad values goes, and that's far more important to us. Even if he was a shit drummer and a shit bass player and whatever, it doesn't matter. We're having fun. We're a punk band, but we just got lucky in terms of he's a good drummer,
Yeah.
yeah, and a really good guy. So I think that's helped with recording the album too. The fact that we've been together for 2 or 3 years now, and gelling really well. But also musically, it means that we know each other, and so I'll come to a rehearsal with say some riffs and some lyrics. So I'll basically write it, but then it'll be a collaboration from there. So by the time we've got the song, it'll be all hands on deck working out, well, structure and all that sort of stuff. So
And so you guys have one album available on Bandcamp, and then you said you were working on some other stuff that's not available yet. Is that right?
yeah, we put an album out. It's actually on hard copy. You can get CD as well, but it is on Bandcamp. That was with the previous lineup. That was before Luke and DJ joined the band. And we had a mate from the scene that was in other band that we knew, and he was studying sound engineering or something like that. And we were his first project. So, we did it on the cheap. It turned out all right. I think we're doing better stuff now because, like I said, we've gelled as a band. We've got a bit more experience now what we're doing, and people that we're recording through know what they're doing. So just a couple more songs, and we're hoping to have an album out. And we've re-recorded Class Trader, which is the version that's on that album, and Gender Blind, plus 10 new ones. So a couple of which are on YouTube, but most of them haven't been released yet.
Cool. I definitely look forward to checking them out. Definitely. And you guys, like, you've played a lot of shows between 2016 now. A lot of them at Loud at Larry's. It seems like
Oh,
that.
Lear's. Yeah,
Oh,
King Lear's.
am I saying it wrong?
It's a place called King Lear's Throne.
Huh?
King Lear, that's the name of the venue. So we just call it Loud at Lear's. Yeah, that's where we've done quite a few gigs there. So guy that runs it's a good guy. It's a good venue.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've also, yeah, played shows all around Australia. And then also for 161 Fest, it sounds like that was rebooked a few times.
You mean the one in Manchester?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't actually get there. We were booked to play in May 2020, and we had flights, everything all sorted out. And then because of COVID, it got cancelled, and that hit us pretty hard financially. I got I think most of my flights back, but the other two, unfortunately, the travel agent they went through went broke. They lost everything. So we've kind of not been able to do that, which is one of the reasons next year we're looking at going over to Europe. We've kind of recovered financially, and COVID. Well, it's still a problem, but we're all vaxxed and all that sort of stuff, and hopefully everything will be all right this time. Like we've been trying to get to do a show in Melbourne for the last 2 years, and it keeps getting shifted, but finally we're going to be playing there in November, and we've been to Sydney for the first time in Wollongong this year, so hopefully next year we'll get a few shows and some dates in Europe, culminating in the Sharp Fest with a few big names. So looking forward to it. Yeah, it's a problem being at the bottom of the world. It's expensive and it's a long way to get anywhere, but so we're hoping to play shows in our region as well. Like we were talking to the boys about doing a show in Singapore and then maybe Malaysia, but they really relocated to Europe. But there's a lot of good bands and some good scenes around, like from everywhere in the Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines. So hopefully we'll get there at some stage. Malaysia, there's a Sharp Fest every year in Malaysia that would be good to play at some time.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I hope you guys do. Like your lyrics are great, your band is great,
Cheers.
your activism is great, and it must be I feel like to go to these festivals and be around other anti-fascists and just make a statement, like a giant festival or a small festival, it doesn't matter, just saying like we're here, fuck you,
Yeah.
together, I think is really impactful and really important.
Yeah, I think the whole networking thing is really important. Like before we got the Punks and Skins Against Bigotry thing up in the band, like there were, people around here, there and everywhere. I remember going to a gig and, seeing Boneheads and that sort of stuff, which thankfully we don't see anymore. And I knew there were like skins out there that were anti-fascist, but we were kind of disparate. But now, like the networking means that we've got a solid local crew that all go out and do gigs together and all wear our sharp patches with pride, and we're identified. And one of the good things about gigs is just about every gig we do, at the end of it, someone comes up saying, "Oh, I got here and there were skinheads and I was shitting myself, but then I realized that no, you were cool." And yeah.
Yeah.
It was one gig where I was just sitting there before we played with a couple of other skins, and this guy comes over. Is this some kind of white only things or something? Because his experience in the early '80s in the UK had been, far right skinheads, and I kind of really respected and admired. He had a Maori friend with him, girlfriend or whatever. So I wouldn't have coloured it with his girlfriend. I thought, it took a lot of bottle for him to come over and say that to a group of skinheads. And we were like, no, of course not. We fucking hate that shit. So I guess it's part of a learning process for a lot of people. And we want to be part of that learning process in saying, no, like skinheads are not about that stuff. If they are about that stuff, they're not skinheads. They're just scum. And we don't want anything to do with them, and they have nothing to do with us. So even if it's one person a gig, it's something, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot of misconception to navigate, but I'm glad you guys are doing it.
That's why we're so high profile and proactive, playing with the banners and all that to make sure there's no mistake whatsoever, where we stand. Yeah, we cop flack for it, but whatever. Luke, the bass player, always says, I'd rather be hated than ignored, so whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. What progress, you've spoke of it a bit, but what progress has Australia made in like removing fascism and racism from its core?
I didn't get the last word.
Oh, removing fascism and racism from its core.
From its core.
Yeah. Um,
Well, I think it's an ongoing struggle. I mean, there's a long history of fascism in Australia, as anywhere. And, go back to the 1930s and 40s, before Hitler went to war with Germany, a lot of the ruling class here admired Hitler, because he was an anti-communist. He was going to, take care of the Bolsheviks, all that sort of stuff. Even former Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister Menzies, who was Prime Minister from 1949 to 1966, he was quoted as saying he quite admired Hitler as unifying Germany and being anti-Bolshevik. And that's, if you look into it, you'll find many, many ruling class figures and aristocrats and so forth, Australia, the US, the UK, were admirers of Hitler for that reason, seeing as a bulwark against, the left. It wasn't until he threatened their own imperialist ambitions that, the story changed. The New Guard in Australia in the 20s and 30s had thousands of members. They were fascist organisations. So fascism and the threat of fascism has been a constant in Australian history. It just fluctuates in terms of what it looks like and how big a threat it is. But so has the history of anti-fascism. We also have a proud history of anti-fascism in Australia and of working class and the left, mobilizing against them, physically smashing them, driving them off the streets and back under the rocks, into the sewer, all that sort of stuff. In terms of getting rid of it from the core, well, I don't think as long as capitalism exists, that will be the case, because I think that capitalism breeds racism, sexism, it breeds oppression, and it breeds fascism, because I think, I can't remember which revolutionary it was, it might have been Trotsky, someone, I don't know, but they said something like fascism is the last line of defense for capitalism against the working class. Like, particularly capitalism in crisis will breed fascism. Anytime that the left is able to grow, the right will want to counter and so forth. Anytime that capitalism in some kind of crisis, it'll breed fascism. So, long answer, but I don't think there's a simple answer, because through time and space, through history, it fluctuates. But yeah, as long as there's capitalism, as long as there's a class struggle, there'll be the threat of fascism. It's just the extent to which it's a threat.
And so you think for real change to happen, we have to remove capitalism and thus classism to make impact or change in colonization and racism?
I do. As I said before, I think racism and all forms of oppression are part, built into the DNA of capitalism. I think we're at a stage now where, to quote another great revolutionary, Rosa Luxemburg, who spoke about, the choice being between barbarism and socialism. And whether you want to talk about socialism, anarchism, whatever, I don't want to get into, the sectarianism and tribalism on the left, but something better. I think we're at the stage where we're going to disintegrate into barbarism if there isn't some kind of radical change, whether it's through climate change or war or inter-imperialist rivalry. I think we're in really dangerous times, and either we will find something that's dramatically better, a real radical transformation of the way the world is organized, or we're going to continue to suffer in greater and greater ways. Mm-hmm. I'm confident, I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I'm realistic. I think change has to happen. Without it, it's just...
Do you have, you just touched on it, but do you have a message for those who are not aware of the gravity of the situation?
A message? Well, I guess there's a couple of things. Like when we started the whole punks and skins against bigotry and all that sort of stuff, as far as just the scene goes, but the left more broadly, we're really, I'm a socialist, I'm a revolutionary socialist, and Jimmy is probably more of an anarchist or anarcho-communist. I don't know, but one of the things we're really keen on is not letting that divide anyone. So, you know, we don't care if people are in the Labor Party or an anarchist or a socialist or whatever in the group. I don't care what, don't be a fuckwit, basically, and you're okay, you're all on the same side. So some kind of red-black unity in the common struggle against fascism has been really, really important. Trying to avoid, you know, sectarianism and tribalism, which is real on the left. But also, I guess, I don't know, I don't feel like it's my place to tell anyone what to do, but I guess our message would be that, you know, we need to be part of a common struggle. We need unity. We need to unite around things that we have a common interest in. Doesn't mean we can't have differences of opinion about organizations or strategies or tactics, but at the same time, we have to be on the same side of the barricades, because the other side of the barricade is organized and getting more organized. They have guns, they have the police, they have the military, they have the courts. To take them on, we have to be united, we have to be strong, and we have to be organized. And that's something I think on the left, the working class movement, that we need to work towards being more united, but also being more militant. I think we need to work to be, you know, supporting each other, but we need the kind of strike waves and so forth that we had in the 60s and 70s and so forth to start clawing back what they've taken from us over the last 30, 40, 50 years. I know in Australia, if you look at since the 1980s, the level of national wealth going to profits compared to wages is completely reversed. I mean, what was it Warren Buffett that said, you know, of course there's a class war, our side is winning. It's true, their side's been winning the last 30, 40 years. We've been having things taken off us. Most of the struggles in the last 30, 40 years have been defensive. They've been trying to defend the things that we've won from being taken from us. Until we can start going on the offensive and not only clawing all that back, but, you know, making some kind of collective approach to organizing the world and its resources, I think we're in deep shit. Again, I give very long answers, but I'm just brainstorming.
That's perfect. And yeah, in your last two answers, you actually answered like at least 5 of my questions, so that was absolutely perfect, to be honest.
There you go.
Yeah. But it is, what you're saying is so true. Like, I feel like it's just a constant struggle to fix or to deal with things that are currently happening, and I just feel like there's limited energy to even like put our foot down and move forward, because we're constantly trying to swat things out of the way or trying to move through things, or something comes up, like it just takes all of the it just takes all the power.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, people live lives. It's hard having a job, having kids, all that sort of stuff. It does take a lot of time and energy about it. But I think the other thing is that even the smallest struggle is worth supporting. I mean, it's absolutely inspirational when things like the Black Lives Matter struggle broke out in the US a couple of years ago. It inspired people everywhere. Big struggles are what we need, big fightbacks are what we need, but the small kernels inside each little struggle, like I said before about the marriage equality stuff here, when we first started, no one was interested. But I don't know if you've heard that song by Uncle Archie Roach, who sadly just died last week, an Indigenous songwriter in Australia, but there's a song called From Little Things, Big Things Grow. And I think that's a good mantra to live by. You have to start somewhere, but if you don't start, well, you don't get anywhere. So each little struggle, each piece of solidarity is all part of the bigger picture, the bigger jigsaw puzzle in terms of making tomorrow a better place.
What would you say to people who have never attended a protest, have not been involved in any action, have not even kind of thought about this kind of thing? What would your advice be to them to help or start to get involved?
Well, I think my starting point would actually be to the people having conversations with them, because I think we don't gain anything by patronizing them, you know, like, oh, you stupid idiot, why haven't you taken a stand? You know, you might think that, I don't know, but I think having wins is really important. So I think knowing your history, knowing the history of the class, like, why do you think you have the right to vote? Why do you think we have equal pay? Why do you think we have many of the things that you take for granted? Is because people went out and fought and we won them. And talk about mobilizations that are successful, like, here, the marriage equality again, thousands of thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands taken to the streets and so forth, that you are not powerless. You are atomized and powerless when you're by yourself, but when you're part of a collective, you have a lot more power as a collective, whether it's in the trade union movement or part of some kind of struggle mobilizing on the streets. So I think you have to, like, sometimes I see people on the left being very dismissive and patronizing towards people that aren't political or aren't engaged and so forth in particular struggles. I'm not sure that that helps. I think it's about having patient conversations with people and pointing to why it makes a difference to join your union or to come along to a particular rally. And I think pointing to the benefits of, like, why that is the case. I think it's really important to know your history and to know the history of struggle, because we have what we have today because we've won it, and anything that we don't have today is because we haven't won it yet, or we've lost it because we haven't had successful struggles. So
yeah, no, it's true. And so, yeah, encouraging people to learn the history, and then also just to find a movement or action that speaks to you after you've done the reading or watch the videos. That's good advice. I have one more question for you. What is your final statement for the people?
The people? What do you mean by the people?
Everybody listening and everybody past that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, firstly, thanks for listening to the podcast and supporting what Julia's doing, because I think it's really good and worthwhile. But have each other's backs. And like I said, it doesn't matter whether it means sharing another band's flyer or promoting a rally or being at the rally or just, speaking out when you see something. Having each other's backs, whether it's within your workplace, within the scene, within a rally, whatever, just be there for each other, because from being there for each other, from that basic unity and solidarity, that has to be the key to, like I said before, a better tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true. Leftist infighting is the worst and is the most discouraging. So what you're saying.
I don't have a problem with disagreements and but sectarianism is a different thing. It takes it beyond that. So
yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying a lot. Thank you for that.
No
and
problem.
So where can people find you? I have Bandcamp. I'm going to throw the links below. Bandcamp, Facebook, YouTube. I'm also going to put the article from Red Flag. I'm also going to put the backbreaker video because it's amazing. Is there anything I missed?
I think we might have an Instagram page. Luke manages an Instagram page. It's probably just called Permanent Revolution, but
I will also put that link on the bottom.
Yeah, that's probably all of it that I can think of. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing everything that you put out in the future, and I really appreciated this conversation today.
No problems. And hopefully, we're really keen at some stage to get to the US, Canada. It comes down to money, timing, living at the bottom of the world. But, once we've done Europe, North America is something that we'd really like to do. So hopefully we'll get there one day, but who knows?
Nice. Well, I will come to your show.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you so much.
No problem.